September 14th, 1943, near Salerno, Italy. Hauptmann Werner Kessler stood in the commander's cupola of his freshly delivered Panther Ausf D, watching through field glasses as American Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft onto Italian beaches. His crew had spent 6 months training on this 45-ton technological marvel. The long-barreled 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The sloped frontal armor, 100mm thick at 55 degrees, was virtually immune to the Sherman's gun. Every technical specification declared German superiority. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Yet what Kessler saw through those optics filled him with an unfamiliar dread. He counted 23 Shermans unloading in just the past hour. Behind them, more landing craft approached. His intelligence briefing that morning had mentioned American tank production. Numbers so absurd, his battalion commander dismissed them as propaganda. But here was the evidence. An endless procession of armor flowing from ships like water from an opened dam. Kessler's Panther was one of exactly 200 that had reached the front lines by September 1943. Germany's factories had struggled for 8 months to produce that many. Meanwhile, his binoculars revealed what American industry had accomplished in a single week. He lowered the field glasses, a sick realization settling in his stomach. They're building them faster than we can destroy them. 3 years earlier, in a Berlin conference room, German tank designers had made decisions that would shape this exact moment. The Panther emerged from a crisis meeting in November 1941, triggered by captured Soviet 34 tanks that had shocked German armor experts. The Daimler-Benz and MAN firms received contracts to develop a 35-ton medium tank that could match the 34's sloped armor and long-range gun while maintaining German standards of engineering precision. MAN's winning design, approved by Hitler in May 1942, embodied everything German industry believed made superior tanks. The Maybach HL 230P30 engine delivered 690 horsepower through a sophisticated 8-speed transmission. The interleaved road wheel suspension distributed weight with mathematical precision, providing smooth rides across rough terrain. The 75mm KWK 42L70 gun featured a barrel so long and precise it could hit targets at distances American gunners couldn't even range. Every component was engineered to perfection. The turret casting alone required specialized foundries capable of pouring 15 tons of molten steel into complex molds. The transmission gears were machined to tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. The engine required premium synthetic fuel that German chemists produced through elaborate coal liquefaction processes. Master craftsmen spent weeks assembling each tank, checking every weld, testing every system, signing off on components with personal pride in their work. This was German manufacturing philosophy distilled to its essence: precision, craftsmanship, technical superiority. Each Panther would be a mechanical masterpiece capable of destroying multiple enemy tanks before sustaining damage. Quality would triumph over quantity because superior engineering always wins. Or so the theory went. Production targets reflected this optimism. The initial order called for 250 Panthers monthly from MAN's Nuremberg facility, ramping to 600 per month by January 1943. With such numbers, German armor commanders calculated they could overwhelm any opponent regardless of how many inferior tanks the enemy fielded. Mathematics favored the side with better weapons, or so conventional wisdom insisted. Reality proved stubborn about conforming to theory. The first pre-production Panthers emerged from MAN in September 1942, 8 months behind schedule. Immediate problems surfaced. The sophisticated transmission, brilliant on paper, overheated during extended operation. The interleaved wheels, perfect for weight distribution, packed with mud that froze solid in Russian winters. The Maybach engine, tuned for maximum performance, demanded constant maintenance and high-octane fuel. The long gun barrel, while devastating at range, proved fragile during transport. Each problem required engineering solutions. Each solution required retooling. Each retooling stopped production. By December 1942, MAN had delivered exactly 37 Panthers, against a target of 600. The gap between ambition and achievement widened monthly. Production averaged 148 Panthers throughout. 1943. Not 250. Not 600. 148. The complexity compounded. As production expanded, Daimler-Benz joined manufacturing in early 1943, followed by Maschinenfabrik Niedersachsen Hanover and Henschel later that year. Spreading production across multiple facilities made sense theoretically, distributing vulnerability to bombing and increasing total output. But coordinating 4 separate factories building identical complex machines proved nightmarish. Each plant interpreted blueprints slightly differently. Components from Daimler-Benz didn't quite fit assemblies from MAN. When a Panther broke down in Russia, repair crews discovered that replacement parts from one manufacturer wouldn't work in tanks built by another. German industry lacked the American obsession with standardization, that boring insistence that every component be absolutely identical regardless of which factory produced it. The workforce shortage intensified problems. Skilled machinists who'd spent decades learning their crafts were being drafted to replace combat casualties. Their replacements, hastily trained laborers and increasing numbers of slave workers from occupied territories, lacked both expertise and motivation. Quality suffered. Production time increased. By mid-1943, building one Panther required approximately 85,000 man-hours, and that figure kept rising. Allied bombing campaigns added chaos to complexity. The MAN plant in Nuremberg was struck on September 10th, October 3rd, and October 19th of 1944. Each raid halted production for days or weeks. The Daimler-Benz facility suffered attacks in August 1944. Production targets became increasingly fictional as factories spent more time clearing rubble than building tanks. Yet, the numbers that emerged remained impressive by German standards. Monthly Panther production peaked at 380 units in July 1944. By 1944, production averaged 315 Panthers monthly. Roughly 3,777 Panthers rolled off assembly lines during 1944 alone. Total production from 1943 through March 1945 reached approximately 6,000 units, 6,000 Panthers, a formidable force by any measure, each one a technical marvel that could dominate battlefields when properly maintained and supplied. German propaganda celebrated this achievement, pointing to the Panther as proof of Aryan engineering genius. Tank crews who received Panthers trained for months to master their sophisticated machines, learning the intricate maintenance procedures, the complex fire control systems, the proper techniques for coaxing maximum performance from temperamental engines. But 6,000 Panthers had to face a very different reality on battlefields across Europe. Because while German industry labored to produce 6,000 masterpiece tanks over 3 years, American factories approached the tank production problem from an entirely opposite philosophy. They weren't trying to build the best tank, they were trying to build the most tanks, and the mathematics of that approach would prove far more devastating than any gun. The story of American Sherman production began not with military planners, but with an automotive executive who understood something German engineers never grasped. William Knudsen, president of General Motors, received a call from President Roosevelt in May 1940 that changed industrial warfare forever. Roosevelt needed tanks, tens of thousands of them, delivered faster than any traditional military contractor could manage. Knudsen's response revealed the gulf between American and German thinking. He didn't promise the best tanks, he promised the most tanks, built so simply that any worker could make them and any soldier could fix them. Detroit wouldn't craft masterpieces, it would mass-produce adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers. To military traditionalists, this sounded like heresy. To Knudsen, it sounded like the only way to win. The challenge was staggering. American tank production in 1940 had limped to 331 units for the entire year. German factories were already churning out thousands. Soviet production was accelerating. If America wanted to fight industrial powers with years of head start, conventional approaches guaranteed defeat. Knudsen needed to do what no military had ever accomplished: transform automobile assembly lines into tank production facilities without losing the speed that made Detroit famous. The M4 Sherman that emerged from this philosophy looked nothing like a German tank in conception. Army Ordnance wanted a medium tank with a 75mm gun, reasonable armor, and adequate mobility. But Knudsen's team added requirements that horrified traditional military engineers but delighted production experts. Make it simple enough for inexperienced workers to build. Use interchangeable parts across all variants. Design for engines that could run on multiple fuel types. Create armor plates that could be welded rather than precisely fitted. Build tracks that field crews could replace without specialized tools. Most importantly, design the entire tank around one sacred principle: keep the production line moving. Every component, every system, every design choice had to answer one question: will this speed production or slow it? If it slowed production, change it. Perfection was the enemy. Good enough was victory. The prototype Sherman, designated T6, was completed on September 2, 1941. Army testing revealed dozens of flaws. The gun mounting wasn't optimal. The armor layout had weaknesses. The suspension could be improved. Traditional procurement would have demanded fixes, redesigns, more prototypes, another year of development. Knudsen's team overruled the objections. Good enough. Start production now. We'll fix problems incrementally while we build. This decision violated every principle of German tank development, where extensive testing preceded production, where each flaw demanded correction before manufacturing began, where quality gates ensured only perfected designs reached assembly lines. To German engineers, the American approach seemed reckless, even stupid. Why build thousands of flawed tanks when you could wait and build hundreds of perfect ones? Because war doesn't wait. Because soldiers need tanks today, not perfect tanks next year. Because an adequate tank in France beats a superior tank still in design review. Knudsen understood what German precision engineering never grasped. In industrial warfare, presence beats perfection every single time. The Detroit tank arsenal, built by Chrysler, embodied this philosophy in brick and steel. Groundbreaking began in September 1940. By April 1941, just 7 months later, completed M3 Lee tanks were rolling off assembly lines before the factory itself was finished. Workers installed windows while tanks drove past. The dedication ceremony featured a 30-ton Lee crushing telephone poles and demolishing a mock house, a spectacle broadcast nationwide on radio. But the Lee was merely practice. In July 1942, the arsenal switched to Sherman production. What happened next redefined industrial warfare. The factory floor covered 1.25 million square feet, larger than all German Panther factories combined. 3 shifts, 24 hours daily, 365 days yearly. The assembly line stretched nearly half a mile. Overhead conveyors carried major components, hulls, turrets, engines, in synchronized ballet. Every 6.5 feet represented 1 minute of production time. The workforce looked nothing like German master craftsmen. Anna Kowalski had served coffee in a diner 2 weeks before she found herself welding hull plates. James Washington, a 58-year-old sharecropper, had never operated machinery more complex than a plough. Margaret Chen, barely 5 feet tall, climbed into turret compartments to wire electrical systems. Over 40,000 people worked Sherman production across multiple plants by mid-1942, and roughly 65% had zero manufacturing experience before the war. Training abandoned traditional apprenticeship. Workers didn't learn to be craftsmen. They learned one specific task, repeated endlessly. Anna didn't learn welding theory. She learned exactly one weld, the vertical seam where hull side meets hull bottom on the M4A3 variant. 4 hours of instruction, 8 hours of practice on scrap metal, then straight to the production line. Her station, number 23, became her universe. She performed that identical weld dozens of times per shift, developing muscle memory that produced perfect results faster than craftsmen with decades of experience. This de-skilling horrified traditionalists who saw it as degrading both workers and products. but it achieved something impossible for craftsman production: speed at scale. The Detroit tank arsenal reached production rates that German intelligence literally refused to believe. In December 1942, exactly 19 months after groundbreaking, the arsenal delivered 896 completed Sherman tanks in a single month, 896 Shermans. In 1 month, from one factory. That exceeded total German Panther production for all of 1943. Let that sink in. One American factory in 1 month built more tanks than all of Germany's Panther facilities combined produced in 12 months. And the Detroit arsenal wasn't even the largest Sherman producer. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc tank arsenal, covering 113 acres of former Michigan farmland, came online in January 1942. By mid-1943, it was producing Shermans at the same pace as Detroit arsenal. Ford's River Rouge plant added its output. Prest Steel Car Company, Pacific Car and Foundry, Baldwin Locomotive Works, American Locomotive Company, Pullman Standard, Federal Machine, and Welder, Lima Locomotive Works, all retooled for Sherman production. 11 factories, each applying assembly line techniques perfected building cars, locomotives, and rail cars, each breaking the Sherman into modular sub-assemblies built simultaneously, then married in final assembly, each training workers to perform specific tasks with machine-like precision, each standardizing parts so absolutely that components from any factory fit any tank regardless of which plant built it. The production statistics became almost incomprehensible. By February 1942, Sherman production began. By December 1942, monthly output exceeded 2,900 tanks. By July 1943, American factories delivered over 2,000 Shermans in a single month. Peak production rates in late 1943 and throughout 1944 averaged 1,500 to 2,000 Shermans monthly. 2,000 Shermans per month meant roughly 66 per day, roughly 3 per hour across all factories. One complete Sherman tank, fully assembled, tested, and ready for combat, emerging from American production every 20 minutes around the clock. Not prototypes, not test vehicles. Combat-ready tanks with trained crews waiting to operate them. The mathematics were brutal and simple. If Germany needed 6 months to produce 148 Panthers, America produced 1,200 Shermans in that same period. 8 Shermans for every Panther. If a German Panther could destroy 5 Shermans before being knocked out, which was optimistic, 3 more Shermans remained to kill that Panther, and 5 more arrived, tomorrow, to replace losses. Werner Kessler understood this mathematics, standing in his Panther turret watching Shermans unload at Salerno. His tank was superior in every technical measure: better gun, better armor, better engineering. But technical superiority meant nothing when buried under avalanches of adequate weapons. The Americans weren't trying to out-engineer Germany, they were trying to outproduce Germany. And production, not engineering, wins industrial wars. The contrast between factories revealed everything about why numbers mattered more than perfection. At Mann's Nuremberg facility, 9,000 skilled workers labored to produce Panthers. The factory floor resembled a medieval guild workshop scaled to industrial size. Master craftsmen supervised apprentices. Each tank was essentially hand-built. Workers signed their names on completed components, taking personal pride in their craftsmanship. Unteroffizier Franz Liehart, who worked at the Nuremberg plant before being drafted, later recalled the process. We spent 3 days just on the final drive assembly. Every gear was checked with micrometers. Every weld was inspected 3 times. We painted identification numbers by hand. It was not mass production. It was art. Meanwhile, at Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal, Rose Monroe, who would become famous as Rosie the Riveter, worked on Sherman production. She later described her experience. "I'd never seen a tank before I started building them. They gave us 2 days of training, then put us on the line. Everything was broken down into simple steps. I'd weld one seam, the tank would move, someone else would weld the next. We'd finish a tank in 4 hours. 4 hours. The time it took Detroit to complete a Sherman was roughly the time Nuremberg spent inspecting welds on a single Panther component. This wasn't about German incompetence or American genius. It was about fundamentally different philosophies colliding. Germany built tanks like Swiss. Watchmakers build timepieces, obsessing over each component until perfect. America built tanks like Ford built Model Ts, breaking complexity into simple steps repeated by ordinary people. The Sherman design itself reflected this philosophy. It contained roughly 8,000 individual parts, not counting rivets. The Continental R975 radial engine had 847 components. The transmission required 23 precision gears. By German standards, this seemed impressively complex. By American standards, this was almost criminally simple. Compare that to the Panther, 26,000 individual parts, similar to the Tiger. The Maybach HL 230 engine alone required specialized machining for components that needed perfect tolerances. The sophisticated transmission demanded 120 different parts unique to Panthers. The interleaved wheel system used 48 road wheels per tank, each requiring individual rubber cushioning, precise spacing. Every Panther advantage came with hidden costs. The long gun barrel, devastating at range, required specialized transport rail cars because it protruded too far for normal rail tunnels. The interleaved wheels, brilliant for weight distribution, meant removing up to 9 outer wheels to replace one damaged inner wheel, a 12-hour job under ideal conditions. The sophisticated transmission, providing smooth power delivery, needed specialized tools and trained mechanics for any serious repair. The Sherman embraced opposite principles. The entire transmission could be replaced in 4 hours by competent mechanics. Track replacement took 90 minutes. Engine swaps required 6 hours. Every part was accessible without removing other components. The sloped armor that critics claimed was inferior to Panther's thick plates had an advantage. Damaged plates could be cut off and welded on by any competent welder in field conditions. Technical Sergeant Robert Early, Maintenance, Chief for the 3rd Armored Division, explained the American advantage. The Sherman was like a farm tractor with armor. Any kid who'd worked on his dad's John Deere could figure it out. We had replacement everything: engines, transmissions, turrets, tracks. Something broke, unbolt it, bolt on a new one. We'd have a knocked-out Sherman running again before the Germans finished diagnosing what was wrong with their Panther. This maintenance differential created cascading advantages. Sherman operational readiness rates averaged 90%. Of 100 Shermans in a unit, 90 would be running on any given day. Mechanical failures were rare. When they occurred, parts were abundant and mechanics plentiful. Panthers achieved 35% operational readiness by late 1944. Of 100 Panthers, if any unit possessed that many, only 35 would be operational. Complex systems failed constantly. Hauptmann Wolfgang Schlick of Schwere Panzer Abteilung 506 reported in August 1944, "We have 6 operational Panthers but fuel for perhaps 30 kilometers. The Americans pass our hidden positions in endless columns. We would destroy a dozen, 2 dozen, and then sit helpless as the 100 behind them crushed us." The fuel situation revealed another production disparity. Shermans ran on regular gasoline. Any octane from 70 to 85 worked fine. The radial aircraft engine was forgiving, reliable, and could burn almost anything flammable in emergencies. American fuel supply was unlimited. Texas alone produced 100 million barrels of oil in 1944. Standard Oil refined 2 billion gallons of gasoline monthly. Panthers required premium fuel, at least 87 octane, for the Maybach engine to function properly. Germany's synthetic fuel plants, primarily using coal liquefaction, produced inferior fuel that damaged engines. By late 1944, fuel allocation for training was eliminated entirely. New Panther crews arrived at units without ever having driven their tanks. The fuel consumption differential was staggering. A Panther consumed 2.75 gallons per mile on roads, 5.5 gallons per mile cross-country. A Sherman consumed 0.5 gallons per mile on roads, 1.2 gallons cross-country. But fuel and maintenance were symptoms of the deeper production crisis. Germany had designed Panthers for technical superiority without considering industrial sustainability. Each design choice that improved battlefield performance reduced production capacity. The sophisticated transmission that provided smooth gear changes required specialized machine tools that only a few factories possessed. The complex interleaved wheels that distributed weight perfectly required precision assembly that only experienced workers could accomplish. The powerful gun that could kill at extreme ranges needed barrel steel, with properties that German metallurgy barely achieved. America designed Shermans for production sustainability without obsessing over technical perfection. Every design choice prioritized manufacturing speed. The simple transmission used modified truck components that hundreds of factories already produced. The standard track and wheel system used rubber components that tire manufacturers could supply. The 75mm gun was an adapted anti-aircraft weapon that existing arsenals already manufactured. The training differential revealed similar patterns. Training a Panther crew properly required 6 months by 1944 because Germany lacked fuel for extensive practice. Experienced instructors were dying faster than they could be replaced, and every tank used for training was one less tank on the front. Gefreiter Kurt Kleine, assigned to Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, described his training. "We had 3 days in an actual Panther. 3 days. We spent most of our training studying diagrams and sitting in wooden mock-ups. When we finally received our company Panthers in Russia, half the crew had never started a Maybach engine. American tank training had Sherman mock-ups, unlimited ammunition for practice, dedicated training facilities far from combat, and, most importantly, time. Fort Knox, Kentucky, the Armored Force School, had hundreds of Shermans dedicated solely to training. Crews spent 12 weeks learning every aspect of their vehicle. They fired thousands of rounds in gunnery practice. They drove hundreds of miles. They performed maintenance until they could replace any component blindfolded. Private First Class Clarence Smoyer, training at Fort Knox in 1943, later recalled, "We beat the hell out of those training tanks, drove them till they broke, fixed them, drove them again. By the time we shipped out, I knew that tank better than my family's farm tractor. Every sound it made, what it meant, every tool, needed for every job." By mid-1944, American factories had achieved something beyond impressive numbers. They'd created a self-sustaining system where production, training, logistics, and replacement all moved at the same relentless pace. When a Sherman battalion lost 20 tanks in combat, 20 replacements arrived from England within 48 hours. When crews needed spare parts, mobile workshops carried complete inventories of common components. When engines failed, replacement power plants sat in forward depots ready for installation. Germany faced opposite realities. When a Panther battalion lost 5 tanks, replacements might arrive in 6 weeks, if ever. When crews needed spare parts, they cannibalized operational Panthers to keep others running. When engines failed, repair crews waited months for components manufactured only at specific factories, increasingly under Allied bombing. D-Day, June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of the mathematical demonstration that would devastate German armored forces. The Allies landed with 4,000 tanks, mostly Shermans, with 8,000 more waiting in England for transport. Against this, Germany had assembled approximately 102 Panthers in Normandy, part of their finest armoured divisions. SS Oberscharführer Ernst Stross, of Schwere SS Panzerabteilung 101, witnessed the reality on June 7th near Caen. "We destroyed 8 Shermans in the morning engagement. By afternoon, 16 more had taken their place. We destroyed 6 of those. By evening, fresh companies kept arriving. They came like ants. You could step on dozens. Thousands more were behind them." The replacement rate told the story. When America lost a Sherman, a new one arrived from England within 48 hours. The replacement system, organized by Colonel Joseph Gillam, maintained a reserve of 2,300 Shermans in British depots. Damaged tanks were either repaired within hours by mobile workshops or simply abandoned for new vehicles. When Germany lost a Panther, replacement took weeks or months, if it came at all. Each Panther required special railway cars for transport. The journey from Germany to Normandy took 5 days under optimal conditions. Allied air attacks often extended this to weeks. Of 45 Panthers dispatched to Normandy in June 1944, only 17 arrived intact. The bombing of rail lines, the shortage of specialized transport, the vulnerability of long columns moving through hostile airspace, all combined to ensure that German reinforcements dribbled to the front while American replacements flooded forward. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The production statistics by mid-1944 revealed mathematics that rendered tactical brilliance irrelevant. American factories were producing approximately 1,500 to 2,000 Shermans monthly. German factories were producing approximately 315 Panthers monthly. The ratio was roughly 6-1. But operational readiness modified that ratio dramatically. Of 1,500 Shermans produced monthly, roughly 1,350 reached frontline units operational. Of 315 Panthers produced monthly, perhaps 110 reached frontline units operational, the rest remaining in depots awaiting parts, fuel, or trained crews. The effective ratio was 12 operational Shermans for every operational Panther arriving monthly. Now factor in combat losses and maintenance. Shermans lost in combat were replaced within days. Shermans damaged mechanically were repaired within hours. Panthers lost in combat took months to replace. Panthers damaged mechanically often couldn't be repaired for lack of parts. A Sherman unit losing 30 tanks remained combat effective because replacements arrived constantly. A Panther unit losing 10 tanks became combat ineffective because no replacements were coming. Lieutenant Colonel John Cloudsley Thompson, of the British 7th Armoured Division, fighting in Normandy, wrote, "The Germans have superior tanks, no question. But we have sufficient tanks. Their Panthers can destroy 3, 4, 5 of our Shermans before being knocked out. But we have 10 Shermans for every Panther they field, and we replace losses faster than they can count their kills. It's not war, it's mathematics." The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provided perfect demonstration. The German 5th Panzer Army attacked with approximately 200 Panthers and Panzer IVs. They faced the American 4th Armored Division with roughly 200 Shermans. In traditional analysis, German technical superiority should have won decisively. Over 6 days of fighting, the Germans lost 86 Panthers and Panzer IVs. The Americans lost 25 Shermans. German commanders celebrated this as validation of superior engineering. 3 German tanks lost for every American tank, proof that quality beats quantity. Except within 48 hours, the 4th Armored Division had received 40 replacement Shermans and was back to full strength. The 5th Panzer Army received 7 replacement Panthers over the next 2 weeks and never recovered combat effectiveness. The Americans could afford to lose 3 Shermans for every Panther because they had 15 more arriving tomorrow. The Germans couldn't afford to lose 1 Panther for 3 Shermans because no replacements were coming. Werner Kessler, if he'd survived past Salerno, which records suggest he didn't, would have recognized this pattern repeating across every front. Every tactical German victory became strategic defeat. Every exchange ratio that favored Panthers became mathematical proof of German collapse. Because wars aren't won by kill ratios, they're won by production capacity. The Soviet front demonstrated the same mathematics at even more catastrophic scale. Operation Bagration, launched June 22, 1944, saw the Soviets deploy 4,080 tanks against German Army Group Center's 495 tanks, including just 29 operational Panthers. The Soviets had learned from American production methods. The 34, crude compared to the Panther, could be produced in 3,000 man-hours versus the Panther's 85,000. Soviet factories were producing 2,034s monthly by mid-1944. When Germans destroyed 3 Soviet tanks, 5 replacements appeared. When they destroyed 5, 10 appeared. Hauptmann Ernst Lindemann of Schwer Panzerabteilung 505 recorded the mathematical horror. July 5th, We destroyed 1634s near Minsk. July 6th, 22 more appeared. We destroyed 11. July 7th, 45. 34s attacked. We destroyed 19 before running out of ammunition. July 8th, 60 34s. We had 2 Panthers operational. We retreated. The Soviets received 4,100 Shermans through Lend-Lease, more than 3 times the total number of Panthers ever built. They treated American Shermans the same way Americans did, as expendable tools. Soviet tank doctrine by 1944 explicitly stated that tanks were cheaper than soldiers. Trade 10 tanks to save 5 men because tanks arrive faster than trained crews. By September 1944, frontline German strength peaked at 2,304 Panthers, but that same month a record number of 692 Panthers were reported lost. Losses exceeded production. The operational force was shrinking despite factories running at maximum capacity. A German Army status report dated March 15, 1945, showed 117 Panthers left in the entire Western Front, of which only 49 were operational. Compare that to American strength. In March 1945, American forces in Europe fielded approximately 8,000 operational Shermans, with 6,000 more in reserve or training in the United States. The ratio was 160 American tanks for every operational German Panther. Technical superiority becomes meaningless when buried under those numbers. The production philosophy differences extended beyond tanks to entire supply chains. Each Sherman required a support system: 150 gallons of fuel every 100 miles, 104 rounds of ammunition as basic load, 30 gallons of oil and lubricants, spare track blocks and road wheels, filters, food and supplies for 5 crew members. American logistics delivered this without fail. The Red Ball Express, operating from August to November 1944, employed 6,000 trucks, running continuously from Normandy beaches to front lines. In a single day, August 29, 1944, the Red Ball delivered 12,342 tons of supplies, 800,000 gallons of fuel, 3,000 tons of ammunition, supplies for 28 divisions. Each Panther required 650 gallons of fuel every 60 miles, 92 rounds of ammunition as basic load, 100 gallons of oil and lubricants, specialized spare parts manufactured only in Germany, premium fuel that became increasingly scarce. German logistics crumbled under the weight. A Panther battalion moving 100 miles required 40,000 gallons of fuel, more than most German depots contained by late 1944. The crew casualty rates revealed the human cost of production philosophies. American doctrine emphasized that tanks were expendable, crews were not. Tank crews received explicit training. If your tank is hit, abandon it immediately and walk back for another tank. Technical Sergeant Mike Kozlowski, running a forward depot in Belgium, described American abundance. We had warehouses full of everything: engines, transmissions, guns, tracks. A unit called for parts. We loaded a truck and sent it. I threw away more spare parts for lack of storage space than German units ever received. German doctrine emphasized that Panthers were irreplaceable, therefore worth dying for. Panther crews fought to the death rather than abandon their machines because no replacement existed. Of approximately 15,000 German Panther crewmen, fewer than 4,000 survived the war, a 73% casualty rate. Of approximately 250,000 American tank crewmen trained, 6,500 died in combat, a 2.6% casualty rate. The production philosophy that seemed to value machines over men actually saved lives through abundance. Sergeant John Irwin, who had 3 Shermans shot from under him, explained, "We were taught that tanks were expendable, crews were not. Bail out fast, walk back, get another tank." The Germans fought like their Panthers were made of gold, because to them they were. They died trying to save machines. We lived by abandoning them. By early 1945, the mathematical demonstration was complete. Germany had produced approximately 6,000 Panthers over 2.5 years. America had produced 49,234 Shermans over 3 years. The ratio was 8.2 Shermans for every Panther. But that number understated the disparity because it didn't account for operational readiness, replacement rates, or logistical support. Factor in that 90% of Shermans reached units operational, while only 35% of Panthers did. Factor in that Sherman losses were replaced within days, while Panther losses were never replaced. Factor in that Shermans could be maintained in field conditions while Panthers required factory-level support. The effective ratio was closer to 20. Operational, supplied, maintained Shermans for every operational, supplied, maintained Panther, 20-1. No amount of technical superiority overcomes those odds. A Panther could destroy 5 Shermans, even 10, before being knocked out. 15 more appeared. The mathematics were brutal and absolute. Germany built better tanks. America built more tanks. More beats better when the gap is measured in orders of magnitude. The final accounting revealed the complete story. Between February 1942 and July 1945, American factories produced 49,234 Sherman tanks from 11 facilities. Peak monthly production exceeded 2,000 units. Average production time per tank dropped from 48 hours in early 1942 to approximately 36 hours by 1944. The entire production run employed roughly 40,000 workers at peak, most with zero manufacturing experience before the war. Between January 1943 and March 1945, German factories produced approximately 6,000 Panthers from 4 primary facilities. Peak monthly production reached 380 units. Average production time per tank rose from 85,000 man-hours in early 1943 to over 100,000 man-hours by late 1944. The entire production run employed roughly 25,000 workers at peak, most skilled craftsmen with years of experience. America produced 8.2 Shermans for every Panther, using fewer workers per tank, less skilled workers per tank, and completing each tank in a fraction of the time. This wasn't about American superiority or German incompetence. This was about fundamentally different approaches to industrial warfare. Germany approached tank production as engineering challenge, build the best possible machine, optimize every component. Accept that perfection takes time. Trust that superior quality defeats inferior quantity. This philosophy worked in peace, when time existed for development, when craftsmen could labor over details, when each tank represented engineering triumph. America approached tank production as industrial challenge. Build adequate machines quickly. Standardize every component. Accept that good enough beats perfect, but late. Trust that overwhelming quantity defeats superior quality. This philosophy worked in war, when time determined survival, when ordinary workers needed to produce extraordinary output, when each tank represented industrial might. The Panther was arguably the best medium tank of World War II in technical terms. Better gun, better armor, better mobility than the Sherman in one-on-one comparison. German tank crews facing Shermans knew they possessed superior weapons. Every engagement that pitted Panther against Sherman favored the Panther tactically. But tactical superiority meant nothing when buried under strategic arithmetic. For every Panther facing Shermans, 8 Shermans existed. When that Panther destroyed 5 Shermans, 3 remained to kill it. When those 3 destroyed that Panther, 5 more Shermans arrived tomorrow, while no Panther replacement came for months. The tactical victories accumulated into strategic collapse. At a 1975 reunion at Fort Knox, American and German tank veterans rendered their final verdict. Otto Arias, Germany's second highest scoring tank ace with over 150 kills, spoke candidly. "We were fighting mathematics, not Americans. I could destroy 10 Shermans and 20 would appear. It was not combat but arithmetic. We were destroying individual drops trying to stop a flood." Staff Sergeant Clyde Brunson, who commanded Shermans in 3 different armoured divisions after having 2 shot from under him, responded, "Otto's right. We knew most of us weren't tank aces. We didn't need to be. We needed to be adequate and numerous. Wars aren't won by heroes, but by production lines." The most poignant moment came when former Oberleutnant Hans von Luck asked the American veterans, Did you know your numbers would overwhelm us regardless of our skill?" Sergeant Ray Hopkins answered, "We knew. Every replacement depot we passed had hundreds of new Shermans. Every letter from home mentioned factories running 3 shifts. We knew you were fighting the entire American industrial machine. We almost felt sorry for you." Werner Kessler, standing in his Panther turret watching Shermans unload at Salerno in September 1943, understood this truth before most. His superior tank couldn't overcome inferior numbers when those numbers approached infinity. His 6 months of training couldn't defeat 2 weeks of training when the enemy had 50 trained crews for every one of his. His sophisticated machinery couldn't beat simple machinery when simple things get fixed immediately and sophisticated things stay broken. The Germans built 6,000 masterpieces. The Americans built 49,000 adequate machines. In industrial warfare, adequate and overwhelming beats perfect and insufficient every single time. The Panther versus Sherman debate was never really about tanks. It was about production philosophy, industrial capacity, and the mathematics of modern war. Germany lost the war in the factories of Detroit long before they lost it on the battlefields of Europe. They were defeated not by better tanks, but by more tanks, not by superior quality, but by overwhelming quantity, not by tactical excellence, but by strategic arithmetic. The assembly line defeated the craftsman's bench, the calculator defeated the micrometer, the flood defeated the dam. In 1989, Friedrich Schultz, former Panther commander, returned to Normandy for the 45th anniversary of D-Day. Standing in the American cemetery above Omaha Beach, he spoke to assembled veterans. "We came with the world's best tanks, convinced of our superiority. You came with adequate tanks and overwhelming numbers. We fought with excellence. You fought with arithmetic. In war, arithmetic always wins. We built 6,000 Panthers. You built 49,000 Shermans. Those numbers are not statistics. They are the difference between dictatorship and democracy, between scarcity and abundance, between defeat and victory. We built better tanks. You built enough tanks. Enough beats better when the gap is measured in tens of thousands." The crowd, American, British, Canadian, and German veterans, stood in silence. The mathematics of war had been reduced to essential truth. The Panther was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to technical excellence, a symbol of quality over quantity. It was also a strategic disaster, a resource sink, and ultimately a monument to the fallacy that tactical superiority overcomes industrial inferiority. The Sherman was a compromise, an adequate solution, a triumph of pragmatism over perfection. It was also a war winner, a strategic masterpiece, and ultimately a monument to the power of industrial democracy. Germany built 6,000 Panthers, each one capable of dominating any battlefield where it appeared. America built 49,000 Shermans and buried the Third Reich beneath an avalanche of adequate tanks operated by adequately trained crews supplied by adequate logistics. The numbers tell the entire story. Everything else, as the historians wrote, is just commentary. In industrial warfare, the assembly line defeats the craftsman every single time. More beats better when the gap reaches biblical proportions. The Germans learned this lesson too late to matter. The Americans proved it early enough to win. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.